What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I want to go through 3 fights that are taking place this weekend. Usually I'll do a one fight per video, but on this one, I mean, we're coming off so many like consequential and big fights. You know, we had Shakur Stevenson versus Oscar Valdez. We recently had George Kambosos versus Devin Haney. We had Jermell Charlo versus Bryan Castaño, Canelo Alvarez versus Dimitri Bivol. I mean, a lot of just highly important action across several divisions. And in this particular video, I want to switch things up just a little bit. I want to actually just kind of briefly go through and cover 3 fights that are taking place this weekend. And they're kind of like the 3 out of the fights that are taking place this weekend. These are kind of the 3 standouts to me. We're going to go through Edgar Berlanga versus Romer Alexis Angulo. We're going to go through Jaime Munguia versus Jimmy Kelly. That one's actually taking place in my home city of Anaheim, California. And we're going to go through a lesser heavyweight title fight, Trevor Bryan versus Daniel DuBois. And we're going to start this off with Edgar Berlanga versus Romer Alexis Angulo. So we've got Edgar Berlanga, 19 wins and 0 losses, taking on Romer Alexis Angulo, 26 wins and 2 losses. Edgar Berlanga, he was pretty much known as the first round knockout sensation. He had a huge string of not only knockouts, but first round knockouts through his first 16 fights, 16-0 with 16 first round knockouts. So this made him very popular. He's a Puerto Rican fighter out of New York. So he started getting a lot of like celebrity advocates and celebrity endorsements from like anybody from Snoop Dogg to Fat Joe. People were basically just coming around and like really giving him a lot of support. And people were talking about, oh, is this the next Mike Tyson, this or that? And, you know, that kind of worried me a little bit that he was getting that much chatter this early in his career from a string of first round knockouts, because, I mean, it does tell you that he's got very, very heavy hands. But what it doesn't account for is how good of a boxer is he? How good is his, middle to late round stamina, just his overall technique? What happens if plan A doesn't work and he's dragged into a more difficult fight? So I'm like, damn, this is putting a lot of pressure on the kid. I hope that he doesn't become so first round knockout reliant that he's got no other tools or skills that he's developing. So he basically went through his first 16 fights with nothing but first round knockouts, and then his next 3 fights were all unanimous decision wins. So they all went the distance. 1 8-rounder and then 2 10-rounders. The second of those 3 distance fights was against Marcelo Caceres, and that was the most difficult out of those 3 decision wins. Mainly because, Caceres had a lot of movement around the ring. So he would move around the perimeter of the ring and then just pick and choose the different moments where he would set his feet and then fire a combination and then continue moving. So he basically had Edgar Berlanga more or less chasing him around the ring. And Edgar Berlanga doesn't show the fastest footwork. Like, he's got kind of heavy feet in how he kind of steps and slides. It's a little bit clunky. Now, he has worked on and does have a very good jab, but it's kind of like a one-speed jab. Every jab is a power jab. He doesn't do too much stuff where he's changing the speed or the cadence on his jab, but it's a heavy jab, and you can see him kind of bust some of his opponents up with the jab. So Caceres actually knocked Edgar Berlanga down. So that really tested Edgar Berlanga in a way that he hadn't been tested up until that point. So that was the second of the 3 decision wins. And then the most recent one was against Steve Rolls, a pretty good fighter who at that point only had 1 loss, and it was to Gennady Golovkin. And Steve Rolls fought Berlanga pretty competitively, but Berlanga was able to get past Steve Rolls, again, through unanimous decision. So he's basically kind of hit a reset on his career, which I think was in order. I think that was a good thing. A lot of people are like, ooh, is he anywhere nearly as good as we thought he was? Well, I mean, the answer is no. If you thought that he was just going to be some first round knockout machine throughout the duration of his career, if that was what you were expecting, no, he's not going to be that good. But that doesn't mean that he can't be good or even great down the line. I think that it was important for him to go the distance a few times and to work on other skills. They have to develop his all-around game. I mean, yes, I'm sure he's gonna still score some knockouts down the line, but it was very important for him to have to work on these other elements to his game. So, it actually reminds me of Khamzat Chimaev from the UFC. He was basically just stomping through his, clearly outmatched opponents, and then he gets into a tough fight with, you know, former title challenger Gilbert Burns, where it's like a lot of people came away from that like, ooh, maybe Khamzat's not as good as we thought he was. It's like, no, he just beat Gilbert Burns. You just had unrealistic expectations in terms of how good and how just mind-numbingly amazing he might be. So no, Berlanga's not going to be just some, you know, first round wrecking ball through, you know, and just mowing down elite talent. That's not going to happen. In fact, they've basically been very responsible in how they've been matching him up. Like, they're not just going to go straight, you know, to Berlanga versus, I don't know, David Benavidez or who else at 168, Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant, or even John Ryder or Zach Parker or David Morrell. Like, they are marginally, incrementally, and gradually bringing him up, you know, kind of fighting these, you know, either very aging, for instance, Alexis Angulo is like 38 years old. Steve Rolls was 38 years old. You know, so some older fighters who aren't going to be able to press the issue so much in the later rounds, and, you know, just giving him different looks, different types of opponents to kind of see if he could further develop his all-around game against. Again, I don't see this as a bad thing. So his next opponent is Romer Alexis Angulo, who only has 2 losses. Those losses came most recently to David Benavidez in August of 2020. That was actually the fight that David Benavidez lost his WBC 168-pound title against for the second time, but this time he lost it on the scales before fighting Alexis Angulo. And Benavidez stopped Angulo in the 10th round. It was so brutal. They should have stopped that fight like maybe 100 punches before they actually stopped the fight. Like, he was getting tattooed. And you know how David Benavidez pours on the offense. I mean, he was putting together like 6 to 8 punch combinations. And, you know, Angulo is a heavy hitter. He wins most of his fights via knockout. But he wasn't able to get, you know, a lot of momentum going against David Benavidez. And by the middle rounds, he was pretty much just getting shut down and just beaten the hell up. But it continued. 7th round, 8th round, 9th round. And I'm talking like, any day now, ref or corner, come on, are we going to stop the fight? And they let it persist until the end of the 10th round. And then they finally stopped it. So that's Angulo's most recent loss. And then the only loss prior to that was against Gilberto Zurdo Ramirez. And this was in 2018. So this is when Zurdo Ramirez was still the WBO 168-pound champion, and Zurdo beat him via unanimous decision. So again, he's only lost, he being Alexis Angulo, his only loss to top-tier talent. So this is a quality opponent. Like, the name might not be as familiar, but this is going to be a test for Edgar Berlanga, and these first few rounds are going to be especially interesting. So I think that something's got to give here, because unless Berlanga is planning to outbox Alexis Angulo, and a lot of people kind of suspect or think that maybe Berlanga isn't gun shy, but maybe he's lost confidence in his power, and he's more so just totally reversed course. And instead of being a first round knockout artist, is basically just doing the reverse and doing the opposite of that, and instead is just becoming more of a jabber, a sweet science guy who isn't even really looking for the knockout in the same way. Again, I think that he's going to, in time, find a balance between the two, but it's going to be interesting to see how he approaches this fight with Angulo, because we know how Angulo is going to come in. Angulo comes in to try to take your head off. And if it's not working for Angulo in the first few rounds, I think that he's going to have much reduced volume in the middle and late rounds. Again, because he's 38 years old and he just doesn't have a lot of volume. Like, he was pretty much spent by the middle rounds against David Benavidez, to where all he was throwing was like an occasional ambush, like maybe a couple of those ambushes per round. And aside from that, was more or less just staying out of range or trying to stay out of range. I mean, David Benavidez doesn't really give you anywhere to run and hide. So then he would kind of do the high guard and just shell up and just take an avalanche of damage. Like, I don't know if Angulo is as durable today as he was in that fight against David Benavidez, because, again, he took an absolute beating against Benavidez, and he hasn't been in the ring for almost the last 2 years. Again, that fight against Benavidez was August of 2020. So we'll see if Angulo is as durable as he was. If he's not, I think Berlanga's going to stop him. If he is still that same dude who took that beating against David Benavidez, then this might get pretty interesting, even in the middle round. So the first few rounds, I think, are going to be must-see, because Berlanga's going to hit him hard a couple times. Like Angulo's defense isn't great, but he manages to get some heavy artillery in himself. So it's going to be interesting to see how Berlanga deals with taking that power. So I'm assuming that Angulo at 38 is going to be a little bit less durable than he was against Benavidez. He's going to have even further reduced punch output, especially when you get into the middle and late rounds, to where I think Berlanga's going to start to pour it on a little bit in the middle and late rounds. And I actually think that he's going to get back on his knockout horse. And I don't think that this one is going to go the 10-round distance. So I'm going to pick Edgar Berlanga to defeat the, again, very durable, who's only lost to David Benavidez and Zordo Ramirez. I think Berlanga's going to build a lot of that momentum that he had just in terms of the public sentiment and the popularity contest with a knockout or a late stoppage of Romer Alexis Angulo in the late rounds. This fight is taking place in Berlanga's hometown, New York City, the Hulu Theater, and again, I think that he's going to win a lot of that popularity back by getting a stoppage or a knockout, just a flat-out knockout or a late stoppage of Angulo in the late rounds. But again, this is going to be very interesting, and I wouldn't be totally surprised if Angulo's aggression and power give Berlanga a lot of issues, especially in the early rounds. But yeah, let me know what you think about that one. Now let's move on to Jaime Munguia against Jimmy Kelly. Jaime Munguia has 39 wins and 0 losses. Jimmy Kelly has 26 wins and 2 losses. Jaime Munguia, one of the most, he's looking like one of the most talented fighters in the middleweight division. It's just really annoyed me that he has not been fighting top tier competition at middleweight. He's not as green as the aforementioned Edgar Berlanga, although Jaime Munguia is still only 25 years old. And he was looking very monstrous at 154, obviously, when he upset Saddam Ali to take the WBO 154-pound title that Ali won off of Miguel Cotto, another not truly 154-pound guy. So you had Saddam Ali, not a 154-pound guy, beat Cotto, another not 154-pound guy, for the 154-pound WBO belt, and then you had a big 154-pounder, Jaime Munguia, knock Saddam Ali out and take that belt. Retained it for over the course of 5 fights. Had a very close call against Dennis Hogan, who I thought outboxed Jaime Munguia, but they gave Jaime Munguia the close and controversial decision. By the way, Jimmy Kelly has also lost via decision to Dennis Hogan. Jaime Munguia didn't lose to him, but should have lost to Dennis Hogan. Jimmy Kelly actually has lost to Dennis Hogan. But then Jaime Munguia, after defending the WBO 154-pound title a few times, went up to 160, and he's beaten the likes of Gary O'Sullivan, Toriano Johnson. That one was actually a very exciting fight. Very back and forth, very difficult fight for Jaime Munguia. He ended up splitting Toriano Johnson's lip devastatingly. Like, that's one of those too gory for TV type of cuts, a vertical cut over his lip, which they stopped the fight after that. So Jaime Munguia got through Toriano Johnson, then fought Camille Cesarometa, Gabriel Rosado, Demetrius Ballard. Gabe Rosado is the only one out of them who went the distance. Demetrius Ballard, he fought him as recently as February of this year. We're now in June, so it was about 3-4 months ago. Nobody wanted to see Jaime Munguia versus Demetrius Ballard. Nobody wanted to see Cesarometa or Toriano Johnson or Gary O'Sullivan fight Jaime Munguia. We've wanted to see Jaime Munguia fight one of these, elite level 160 pounders, because he's showing that he's got all the tools. He's got devastating power, got a lot of reach, he's got a lot of volume, and he carries his power late into the fights. He's an accurate puncher. He shows that he could take, a good punch as well, so he's durable. He just seems like he would be a handful for just about anybody at 160. So we're seeing him fight guys who really have no business being in the ring with him. And I view Jimmy Kelly as being the same type of opponent for Jaime Munguia, unfortunately. And it's crazy. They came this close, it seemed, to making Jermall Charlo the WBC champ at 160 versus Jaime Munguia. But Golden Boy, and you would think Jaime Munguia should be the B-side in this fight. Jermall Charlo's the undefeated WBC champion, a former 154-pound champion too, so he's a 2-division champion. And Jaime Munguia fights on DAZN. Jermall Charlo's on PBC. And Golden Boy, Jaime Munguia's promoter, insisted that this fight potential fight take place on DAZN, or at least they be involved in the fight. And, PBC's not having that. So the fight wasn't able to be made. Very unfortunate. And, I'm disappointed in Golden Boy for not allowing that fight to happen, because, that's the type of opportunity Jaime Munguia needs. And that's the kind of fight and opponent that his talent level should appropriately be matched up against. But that fight didn't happen. Instead, we're getting, Jaime Munguia versus Jimmy Kelly. So I expect Jaime Munguia to pretty much blow through Jimmy Kelly. And this fight, by the way, is actually taking place at 168, I believe. But I think that Jaime Munguia, I look at this as just kind of being a one-off at 168, kind of a stay busy fight for Munguia. Just not against an opponent that anybody would have cared to see him go against. So I think he will get a knockout or stoppage over Jimmy Kelly. Jimmy Kelly has the 2 losses, the one to Dennis Hogan, and then another loss in 2015 against Liam Smith. And, if this fight ends up being like super competitive, then great. But I don't think that this type of matchup merits a too thorough of a breakdown. Look, I did a preview on Jaime Munguia versus Demetrius Ballard, all right? And I didn't think Ballard was going to be very good against Munguia. I thought he was going to do better than he did. I mean, he got knocked out in the 3rd round. He was looking decent in the 1st round, and he was looking good until he got hit cleanly. And then by that point, it was almost lights out. Like, he got knocked on his face by the time this one was over. And I had seen Demetrius Ballard fight before. I've seen Jimmy Kelly fight before. I just don't think that their skill sets merit we see mismatches in boxing all the time. It's just frustrating. It's understandable if you're a top level fighter and you mix it up. You fight a quality opponent, like somebody who's near your talent level, and then have a kind of off-schedule, lesser opponent type of fight, and then a tough opponent, and then a not-so-tough opponent. If you go back and forth, great. The problem lies when you fight Toriano Johnson, and then Cesar Romero, and then Gabriel Rosado, and I have a lot of respect for Gabriel Rosado, but, you saw how that fight played out. Then Gabriel Rosado, then Demetrius Ballard, and then Jimmy Kelly. Now you're just lining up a whole bunch of outmatched opponents. So I don't see any justification in that type of fight schedule. So, Jaime Munguia, like Jermall Charlo, I expect or hope to see them fight tougher competition, because now Charlo, again, they almost made this fight with Munguia, but Charlo is now having back-to-backs against Montiel and then Sulechki. So it's like, all right, come on, dude, really? And if he was like a little bit more active and fighting maybe 2-3 times a year, that would be one thing. But he's not even staying busy, he being Jermall Charlo. He's fighting like once a year and fighting that level of opponent. He fought Derevianchenko back in 2020, fought once in 2021, and this is his first fight in 2022 against Sulechki. At least Jaime Munguia is staying somewhat busy. This will be his 2nd fight in 2022. He fought twice in 2021, twice in 2020. So at least he's fighting twice a year. We just need more, we just need him to step it up opponent-wise. But I expect him to stop Jimmy Kelly, and probably within 4 to 5 rounds. Like, he's a very dangerous puncher. So yeah, I'm not super excited about that one, but I wanted to just touch on it momentarily. So now let's get into the lesser WBA title fight, heavyweight title fight between Trevor Bryan and Daniel DuBois. Trevor Bryan has 22 wins and 0 losses. He's defending that WBA regular heavyweight title against Daniel DuBois. 17 wins and 1 loss. Daniel DuBois was kind of an up-and-coming emerging UK knockout artist, kind of Edgar Berlanga-like, right, where he's knocking out a bunch of lesser opponents, and they're like, okay, is this going to be like the next Anthony Joshua? He's just so heavy-handed, pretty big dude, about 6'5", getting just a string of early knockouts. And then in November of 2020, he fights Joe Joyce, still undefeated Joe Joyce, and he loses via 10th round knockout. He basically gets a healthy diet of jabs from one of the best jabbers in the division, Joe Joyce. And Joe Joyce actually puts him down because he damaged Daniel DuBois' eye with one of those jabs, DuBois took a knee and didn't get up. He didn't continue the fight, and so that was a major setback for the emerging talent that is Daniel DuBois. So since then, he's had another 2 fights, first round knockout against Joe Kusumano and a second round knockout against Bogdan Dinu. And so he went back to fighting, lesser tier heavyweight opponents. And so this is kind of another step up. I mean, it is a step up. He's fighting a lesser belt holder, even though Trevor Bryan's biggest win might still be against either BJ Flores or Jonathan Guidry. Like, he hasn't been fighting a lot of good fighters, really. And Trevor Bryan is actually promoted by Don King, the OG Don King. And it's weird how somebody could earn a belt just flying totally under the radar and beating opponents that boxing fans, let alone casual fans, most actual boxing fans haven't heard of most of the people that Trevor Bryan has beaten, except for maybe like Berlanga and a couple of others. So Trevor Bryan, about 6'4", he's 32 years old. He's kind of like, awkward looking, a little clumsy. He does have a decent jab, and he actually has hired Larry Holmes to prepare him for Daniel DuBois because, they saw how effectively Joe Joyce's jab worked against Daniel DuBois. So Larry Holmes, one of the greatest jabs in heavyweight or just boxing history, one of the most dominant heavyweight champions in boxing history, Larry Holmes, has pretty much helped with training Trevor Bryan against Daniel DuBois. Now, the stakes are, relatively high in this one since there is a belt involved. But the problem is the heavyweight landscape, or at least the title landscape, with the belts that actually matter, like the major belts, are occupied either with Tyson Fury holding the WBC or Alexander Usyk holding the other belts, and Alexander Usyk holding the actual WBA belt is about to rematch Anthony Joshua, so that's going to be tied up for a while. So theoretically, the winner of this fight should be in line. Whether they're next in line, who the hell knows, but they're going to be in the line to fight for the WBA belt, and we'll see how strongly the WBA imposes the mandatories in this case, right? Sometimes they'll impose it strongly. Sometimes they'll just say, kind of hands off and let the heavyweight champion do what they want to do in opponent selection. So we'll see how that heavyweight landscape shapes up in the weeks and months to come whenever Usyk versus Joshua 2 does in fact happen. But the way I see Trevor Bryan versus Daniel DuBois play out is Trevor Bryan, again, he's a little bit clumsy looking. He doesn't seem to be like a great athlete, but he is undefeated. He wins a lot of his fights via knockout or TKO. He's pretty heavy-handed, but he does get hit. And he gets hit somewhat often. And, he was awarded a split decision win in his very last fight against Jonathan Guidry, but that was just a bogus scorecard that gave Guidry the 116 to 112 scorecard. That should have been a unanimous decision win for Trevor Bryan. And even in that fight, he was tasting a lot of leather, as he was against, Berlanga and quite frankly in most of his fights. But he's usually the one who's the better boxer out of the two. So, if this was like maybe, Jonathan Rice, the guy who beat Michael Coffey twice, I might favor like a Jonathan Rice who seems pretty athletic and is heavy-handed and throws punches from long range and at awkward angles. I might favor somebody like that against kind of the somewhat robotic Daniel DuBois. But Trevor Bryan, to me, gets hit a little too much to be hanging with Daniel DuBois, who, if nothing else, has pretty devastating punching power. So it's going to be interesting to see how Daniel DuBois handles Trevor Bryan's jab, especially if Trevor Bryan gets out of the early rounds, which I expect him to, just because of his experience level. I don't think Daniel DuBois is just going to trash Trevor Bryan in the first 3 to 4 rounds. So then it becomes a question of how well has Trevor Bryan worked on this jab that, he wants to be able to control Daniel DuBois with, and how many adjustments has Daniel DuBois made in dealing with an educated jab. Now, Trevor Bryan, to me, is not Joe Joyce. He's not as skilled as Joe Joyce. Joe Joyce is a former Olympic medalist. But Daniel DuBois, I do think, has just oversized punching power. And I think that he's been an improving boxer, but he's still pretty robotic. So I think that the rounds in the early portion of this fight are going to be pretty close. But I do think that at some point in like the middle rounds, Trevor Bryan is going to get caught with something big from Daniel DuBois, which is going to change up the whole tone and tenor of this fight. And I think Daniel DuBois is going to score like a 7th through 9th round knockout or TKO of Trevor Bryan. And that would be a pretty big deal because then you would get, because look, Trevor Bryan has been holding this belt, but he had like 2 years of inactivity between fighting BJ Flores in August 11th of 2018 and then fighting Bermane Stavern in January 29th of 2021 and then taking a whole year off before fighting Jonathan Guidry. So he's been like a half inactive lesser belt holder. So there hasn't been like any built up excitement around Trevor Bryan. And then you couple that with his skills and his style, it just isn't very fan friendly. It's one of those, I can't believe this guy's holding a belt type of things just based on the eye test. But Daniel DuBois, if nothing else, is a knockout artist. So I think that there's going to be some more fan friendliness if he is to capture a lesser share of the WBA belt, not to mention, the UK is like really big in the heavyweight division especially, so there's a lot of excitement there. And again, Daniel DuBois was already a pretty hyped prospect, just, knocking out all those outmatched opponents early in his career. So it would kind of be a shot in the arm. Not that UK heavyweight boxing needs a shot in the arm, but DuBois would be a more invigorating belt holder than Trevor Bryan at this point. Now, if Trevor Bryan ends up stopping DuBois, all that's changed. All of a sudden, people are going to have to look at Trevor Bryan very differently and finally put some respect on his name. So we'll see how this one plays out. But again, I just don't love the fact that Trevor Bryan gets hit as much as he does. Again, and I do think it's going to be interesting to see how DuBois handles Trevor Bryan's jab. But again, I don't think Trevor Bryan is as good a jabber as Joe Joyce. So I think that he's going to get hit with something big in the middle rounds and eventually stop. Again, I say 7th through 9th round. I'm going Daniel DuBois via knockout or TKO. But yeah, let me know what you think about any one of those fights. Whether we're talking Edgar Berlanga versus Alexis Angulo, Jaime Munguia versus Jimmy Kelly, or Trevor Bryan versus Daniel DuBois. Let me know what you think in the comments. And please, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.